Hickory Thompson here. We're going to be talking today about the age of Jackson. Greatest president ever lived, Andy Jackson. Now he was a man. He came from humble start, but rose to the presidency of the United States. My golly, that was a man. Let me set the scene for you. We're at the Red River, the Kentucky Red River. It's dawn, and you can hear the birds waking up. You can take a deep breath, and you can smell the green trees of Kentucky, and right across the river you'll find Tennessee. Oh, but we're not here alone. No, we're here on business. Deadly business, because you see, Andy Jackson, who is here to fight himself a duel. Jackson is 39. His opponent is a man by the name of Charles Dickinson. He's 27. They're both lawyers. And there's been insults around, particularly insults to his darling Rachel, Andy's darling Rachel, his wife, and business over a horse race in which the father-in-law of Charles Dickinson lost a wager of some $3,000. The other horse was owned by Andrew Jackson. And so there they are. The seconds are all in place. The principals are all in place. They're going to have a duel. Now, Dickinson, now he is what we call a snapshot. He's a deadly man with a gun. He's able to quickly take aim and snap off a shot. He is known to practice with strings stretched apart and shoot, and will snap those strings. Now, it will be fought at a range of 8 paces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 between them. They will turn and they will fire. Now Jackson, he's wearing a large frock coat. He's a skinny man, almost gaunt. It hangs about him like a huge blanket. And Dickinson, sure enough, he gets the shot. Boom. The gun goes off. Jackson is still standing. Have I missed? He wonders. And Jackson, on the other side, with his gun ready, fires, striking young Charles in the abdomen. He drops, dying. Now, Jackson has been wounded himself. The bullet has broken one of his ribs and has lodged 1 inch away from his heart. But the big frock coat fooled Dickinson into thinking his heart was in a slightly different location. Otherwise, it would have been Jackson who went down, and he would not let Dickinson know that he has been hit. But he leaves the field under his own power, for he is a stubborn and a proud man. Now, Jackson, his parents, they're from Ulster. They're Scots. Originally came from Scotland and settled in Ireland as colonists. Well, they've come over in 1765 and settled themselves into the hills of South Carolina. His father dies before Jackson is even born. His mother, well, it's during the Revolutionary War, and she is nursing American prisoners of war on the prison ships in 1781. And there, amongst the squalor and conditions of those wretched prison ships, she contracts cholera and dies. So, at age 14, Jackson is basically on his own. He's always been an independent spirit. Even as when his mother alive, he ran things the way he wanted to. At age 12, he was involved with cockfights, roosters rather, with large spurs attached to them, would fight each other to the death, blood spurting all over the crowd, bets being made, people yelling and screaming, and Jackson would be right there amongst them, gambling right along with everybody else, even at the tender age of 12. At 14, he is captured by the British at Camden and made a prisoner. Now, one of the British officers wants him to be his boot boy, take care of his boots, and he refuses, absolutely refuses. Now, that makes that officer angry, and he pulls out his sword and slashes and slashes and slashes at young Andy. Still has a scar on his head, on his hand, cut right to the bone. And he got himself a real hatred for British after that incident. In 1784, he persuades one of the local lawyers to allow him to study law. Now, in these days, you didn't go to law school. You didn't go off to some college. Most of the boys got a prominent lawyer who would teach him, and they would sit down with all the library of books that this man had that were full of the law, and they would study. Several boys at a time, young men, and the older lawyer would assist them, and then they would be examined and see if they were fit to be lawyers, and they would be admitted to the bar. During this time, he was what referred to as the head of the rowdies. Gambling, horse racing. He was quite the young man. But he was disciplined enough to become a lawyer. At age 20, he is admitted to the bar. And he's going to go west. He's going to go west on his horse, and he's going to have 2 guns right there up on the saddle. And he is going to be a public prosecutor in Tennessee. His reputation for law enforcement quickly grows, so everyone knows who he is, and he's going to speculate in land. And you know what? By the 1790s, he will have 80,000 acres of land. He's going to raise cotton. He's going to own slaves. He is going to become a rich man. He's going to be elected to the Tennessee House of Representatives. And later, he's going to become a senator. He'll be a judge. He will be a major general. One of the things that he prides himself most on, his generalship. But he's going to have troubles. One of the troubles he's going to have is marriage. Well, you see, he falls in love with the beautiful Rachel Robards. Now, Rachel, she's got a problem. The problem is, it's her husband. Oh, I didn't mention that she was married before Jackson. Well, she was, and Robards was a bit of a scoundrel and left her, and so old Jackson takes her in. Well, they're not divorced is the problem, and they're married. Jackson and Rachel are married. And of course, Robards doesn't get a divorce for much of later down the road, and it's very embarrassing because they got to get remarried. There's charges of bigamy and all kinds of problems there. Will be a major problem. It was the cause of his fight with Charles Dickinson. He will make himself powerful enemies. The most powerful men in the state will become his enemies, and in the area too. Tennessee Governor Tom Sevier, and he will actually meet on the field of dueling. And Thomas Benton, who will later become a United States Senator from Missouri. Oh, they were once friends. And it seems that during one of these duels that Jackson represented was a second for a man who had challenged Benton's brother. And now Benton is angry. And he starts spouting off, and the word gets back to Jackson that young Benton is spouting off against him. And he says, well, I'll just take my bullwhip and I'll go and whip his hide. And he goes to the hotel where this young man is, and he goes storming in to whip this boy. And well, a fight ensues, and knives are going to be pulled, and guns are going to be fired off, and he ends up with a wound in the back of his shoulder. And they think he's going to die. He's in the hotel room, and he soaks through 2 mattresses, soaks them completely through with blood. But he doesn't die. And within a few days of this incident, the Creek Indians are going to attack Fort Mims, and they're going to massacre 500 people. And he, Jackson, is going to be put in charge of the militia. He's going to have a sling because his shoulder and arm were so badly damaged. They wanted to amputate it. He told them he couldn't do that. And so he will go to war with those Indians, and he will end up victorious. He will become a national hero. He will end up being appointed a major general and going down to New Orleans, and he will defeat the British there. He will be Old Hickory, tough, strong. Well, in the election of 1824, the Federalist Party has pretty well self-destructed. It's pretty well dissolved. There's going to be a 5-man race for the presidency. It'll go down to 4 because John C. Calhoun will withdraw to become the vice president. Now, John Quincy Adams, he will get 84 electoral votes. Henry Clay will get 37. William Crawford will pull in with 41, and Andy Jackson will get more than anyone, 99. But there's a problem. The problem is, it's not a majority. Well, with no majority, it goes back to the House of Representatives, and there Henry Clay makes his corrupt deal. His corrupt bargain. He is going to be made Secretary of State. And his votes will switch over to John Quincy Adams, and he will become president. Even though Jackson had more votes than anyone, he feels cheated. He feels that there was indeed a corrupt bargain made that will make Henry Clay Secretary of State. Because you see, the last 4 Secretaries of State have all become President of the United States. It's the jumping off place, and he knows it. And Jackson is angry. He's angry. You see, because Adams, he supports big government. Adams supports canals and putting money into that. He supports farms, and he supports manufacturing. He is a Federalist in Democratic clothing. He's also inept. Oh, he's just a stuffy man. He's a stubborn, stuffy man, and he's doesn't get along hardly with anybody. So, is he going to become a great president? Not really. The next election, it will be in 1828. It will be the first Westerner versus the elite aristocrats. It will be a different kind of an election. It will be the birth of what we are going to call the Common Era, in which the common man begins to take power in America, away from the elite, the rich, who had power before. Even though Jackson owns himself a large plantation and slaves and is very wealthy, he started off from very humble beginnings. He is a common man. He swears, he drinks, he's got a horrid temper, he's got marriage troubles. By golly, he's just like everybody we know. Well, so how do you have a campaign against this stuffy aristocrat? Well, number one, you avoid the issues. Don't even argue the issues. No, sirree, you're going to rely on your military record. After all, Andy Jackson is a national hero. He's got a great military record. Adams is going to be charged with corruption, with gambling. Well, there's not much to that charge, actually. You see, what really happened was he bought himself a chess set for the White House, and he bought himself a billiard table for the White House, paid for with government funds. They call those gambling devices. Well, they did, at least in the newspapers. Well, he's going to be charged with being too British, with having lived with his wife before they were married, in a sinful relationship. And Adams will even be charged with providing American young girls to be sent to the Tsar of Russia. All of this in the newspapers. Now, Adams gives equally ridiculous countercharges. He charges that Jackson is a gambler and a murderer. Well, so what if there's a little bit of truth to it? But he wasn't a military tyrant, and he was charged with that as well. But Jackson wins hands down. 178 electoral votes to 83, 60%, 66% of the vote. Now the reception in the White House. Now he's a common man, therefore everybody feels they're a part of this government. There are a lot more people than usual show up and they want to go to the reception. It's a muddy day and they come clomping right on into the White House. They're gawking and staring and they're standing on furniture and chairs are collapsing and crystals are breaking and it's a complete mess and it's such a shambles that Jackson has got to leave. It's just the crowds are too pressing and he escapes out the back and spends the night in a hotel. But Jackson's persona is that he is a friend of the common man. He is supported by every social class. Every social class. He's incredibly popular. And Jackson, he believes that the common man knew, or rather knows, what is right by instinct. And that any common man can be president of the United States because any common good man knows enough to make wise choices. They make wise choices every day just getting through life. And that's a big change from Jefferson and his ideas. It's a big change to put the common man in charge, to say that anyone can do this job and anyone with common sense can do it. Now politics are going to be changing. Politics are going to be changing. The western states are going to stop land requirements that are required to allow people to vote. Remember, you used to have to own a certain amount of land to be able to vote. Aaron Burr got some of those changes in New York. But some of the western states aren't going to have anything to do with those requirements. If you're a citizen and you're over the proper age, you can vote. A few other things are going to change as well in this changing time of politics. One thing that's going to change is churches are going to lose their special privileges. These churches had these privileges under the British system. The Anglican Church, the Church of England, of course, had special tithes and taxes that were going to be paid to the church. And some of the states, even after the Revolution, continue to support the Church of England, the Anglican Church. And those things are going to be put stop to. They're going to have a separation of church and state. And laws will be passed and these special privileges will be lost. The free school movement is going to come. They want the common man to be educated. And if you have a common man going to be educated, he's going to get more involved in things because he can read about them. He can understand the issues of the day. Affordable newspapers are going to happen. And they're going to cover politics. And the common man with a better education is going to read about it. And he's going to understand more about politics. And as a result of understanding more about politics, he's going to become more involved in politics. And guess what happens? Voter turnout increases. That's just what we want. It's a democracy. You want the people educated. You want people talking about politics. And it's going to happen. Because penny newspapers are cheap enough and affordable enough that it gets around to everybody. Education is starting to increase. Nominating conventions are going to be held for offices. And then we have a thing called the spoils system. Now, the spoils system, what that is when the president assumes office, there are a bunch of positions that he can appoint people to. To the victor go the spoils, is where that phrase comes from. If you win, you get to put your people in charge. Well, other people have been doing this, but Jackson does it even more. It's a political payback is what it is, and Jackson is going to have what he calls rotation in office. In other words, he'll put one guy in there for a certain amount of time, and he will rotate him out and put a new guy in. More people get to participate in government. More common people get to be put in. He puts in mainly very well-educated, more rich people. However, he's going to rotate them through, and this is going to change things. One of the things it's going to do is going to clean house with appointments. He's going to, the bureaucracies that are entrenched and have been there for years and years and years through several of the different administrations, they're going to be right out. He's going to just clean them out. The problem, of course, is that the beginners are rather inept when they first get their job, and it takes them a while, and so the gears of government turn a bit slowly at first. And vetoes. Let's talk about vetoes for a minute. Jackson was the king of vetoes. Nobody before him really vetoed very much. In fact, between Washington and John Quincy Adams, there were only 9 vetoes. Jackson will give 12 vetoes by himself. And those other fellows, when they vetoed something, it was because it was unconstitutional, they thought. But not Jackson. He vetoed them because he just didn't like the darn things. He establishes what is called a pocket veto. And that means he didn't veto it. He didn't sign the bill either. What he did was he waited until the end of the session, and then the bill just dies. He's going to have tariff problems. And it's regional again. People in the South don't want any tariffs. People in the North do. People in the North are manufacturers. They want to be protected from goods coming in from Europe. Therefore, they want a tariff. Well, the people in the South, they want goods coming freely and cheaply, and they don't want to pay extra money, so the people in the North can be happy. No, the people in the South want to be happy and don't want to have any tariffs. So South Carolina, they pass a law that says they're going to nullify tariffs. This is what is called the nullification crisis. Now, Jefferson, he had this same sort of idea as well, but now it's really going to come home to roost again, because Jackson says if the individual states can nullify things like national taxes, the tariffs, well, then the whole country will just fall apart, because anything a state doesn't like, they'll just say we don't want to do it, and there's nothing the federal government can do about it. But Jackson says he'll do something about it. By golly, this man's a fighter. He's not going to let the United States dissolve itself because a few states have got a few different ideas. No, sirree. He says he's going to take an army, and he's going to go down there personally, and he's going to go down to South Carolina, and if necessary, he will clear the problem up himself. Well, he's very deadly serious, and everybody knows that. So obviously a compromise has got to be worked out, and that's exactly what they do. You got to compromise yourself when you've got people at loggerheads. Now another question. Are you going to renew the charter to the Bank of the United States of America? Well, the state banks are all complaining that they're losing money because of this organization, and as a result, they're having problems with the bank president, a guy by the name of Nicholas Biddle. He controls the state banks, because what happens is the banks produce banknotes, paper notes, and they're backed by supposedly gold and silver that's kept at the bank. Well, he keeps calling these notes due, and so they've got to pay to the federal government the actual hard money, the gold and the silver. That limits the amount of paper money that they can produce. It also limits the amount of loans that they can make. What it basically does is it slows down the economy. It slows down the growth of business, and the banks don't like that. The state banks don't, but it does provide stability, which is one of the reasons that he did it. It stabilized the economy. Now, Jackson, he doesn't like banks, period. Whether it's a state bank or a federal bank, he doesn't care. He just hates banks. And so he makes the biggest mistake of his entire presidency. Monumental mistake. He vetoes the bank bill. And it is incredibly popular because he's the common man, and the common man, they don't like bankers either. By golly, the bankers are always foreclosing on mortgages and all kinds of things like that. You don't like bankers. It's a bunch of rich folks controlling money for rich people. But the banks are now uncontrolled. And that's a problem. They start producing tons of paper money. People start borrowing heavy. Land prices begin to go up because people have more money to buy. And as a result, prices go up. The United States luckily releases more lands. And then we have what we call an inflationary spiral. Begins the higher and higher prices go up, up and up and up. They borrow more money to buy more land. Because the land has been bought up, the land prices are going to go up. Therefore, they're going to need to borrow more money. When they borrow more money, the price of land keeps going up, and they keep going higher and higher and higher, and we've got inflation again. There's huge land speculation. In fact, so much so that plots are laid out so that you would need 2 million immigrants to suddenly show up in order to fill all of the plots. But nobody seems to mind because things are so poorly regulated now that the national bank is gone. And then the economy slows. The economy slows, and this whole thing is going to come crashing down in the panic of 1837. As we go from a boom economy, where we're making lots of money, lots of progress, to a bust economy in which we have a depression. Over 800 banks are going to fail. It was indeed Jackson's poorest decision. There's going to be other problems. Problems with the Indians. Now, there's always been Indian problems, and there are several ways you can deal with them. Well, one of the ways they're going to deal with them is they say, you Indians, you can move beyond the Mississippi River away from civilization. Or you can be civilized and live on farms. And so they begin what is called the Indian removal policy, in which they are going to literally remove whole tribes out of the United States and into the frontier lands. And in 1831, 1835, 15,000 Choctaw Indians are moved from the state of Mississippi to Arkansas. They don't have any tents. They don't have any wagons. The young and the old and the sick are going to end up, many of them, dying. And if the Indians resist, federal troops are going to be called in, and they're going to be forcibly removed. Then we have the tragedy of the Cherokee. Now, the Cherokee Indians, they listened and they saw and they watched what was happening to their Indian neighbors. And they decided, well, we can either be removed or we can become civilized. So they wisely decide to become civilized. And they're going to give up any of their Indian ways, and they're going to do everything that the American government says is necessary. They are going to become civilized. That means they're going to become farmers. And so they do. They start planting crops just like their white neighbors. They start cultivating the fields exactly in the same process. They live in houses just the same as their white neighbors. They even begin to take slaves, and they own slaves just like their white neighbors. A written language, well, most Indians don't have written languages. They invent their own written language. They write their own constitution. They do everything they can to comply, to be civilized, and it's just not enough. The state of Georgia wants them removed, and they are removed. They are moved to Oklahoma in a very tragic scene which is called the Trail of Tears, in which 4,000 of the Indians die in the move. Well, we'll have another election, the election of 1836, and Martin Van Buren is going to win. Now, he took office just as the Panic of 1837 hits, so he's going to have a Depression time. And Depression time is not going to be sweet. And when you're in a depression, it generally means that the president is not going to be reelected. Now, he prefers state action to federal. He's more Jeffersonian in this idea. He pretty much ignores the economy. It's just going to run on its own. It will recover eventually. He does take the gold and the silver and put them into government vaults. But the next election of 1840, we're going to have an opponent, a war hero again, William Henry Harrison. Now, he's going to have a unique campaign. His campaign is going to be referred to as the Log Cabin Campaign. Now, remember how successful Jackson was being the common man? Well, Harrison is going to be equally as common. He is going to do everything in his power to appear to be much the same as Jackson. I mean, they're cut basically from the same cloth as their Indian fighters, war heroes. And that's what he presents himself as. And they present him as a hard cider swilling common man who lives in a backwoods cabin. Well, that couldn't be farther than the truth. He was actually wealthy, and I don't even think he visited many people that lived in cabins anyway. But he is up against the aristocratic Van Buren. Shades of Jackson in the previous elections. And so what's going to happen? Well, the common man is going to win. Well, this is a time we call the era of Jackson, in which Jackson made some tremendous changes, and America made some tremendous changes. Literally, the common man did feel much a part of the government. The common man began to feel that this government was his, and even a common man could run for the presidency, and the common man could win. It was a time when dreadful things are going to happen. Dreadful things by government meddling in the National Bank. Jackson made a horrid mistake, and the nation paid for it. And the Indians are going to pay for the removal policy, as they are going to suffer untold hardships because of the greed that the Americans had for their land. It'll be a time when something called manifest destiny begins to rear its head. It is the feeling that America has a great destiny. A destiny from God to spread from sea to shining sea. that as a culture, the Americans will dominate and that they will become a great nation. And well, that's what Jackson is all about.